name is Shiva, and I'm the co-chair of this committee. I'm joined today by my co-chair, Janan, and other members of our planning committee, Anne, Mena, and Neda. At this time, I would like to say thank you to our sponsors, because without their help, sustaining this series would not be possible. So I'm going to share this slide of the name of our supporters. You see here the name of our supporters in so many different levels. From Platinum, we have a comprehensive neuropsychological services, and I'm proud to say that I'm affiliated with this company. Also, in the Platinum level, we have a Hartford Healthcare. Thank you so much. You see your beautiful names in the level of supporters and friends. I also would like to say thank you to the Connecticut Health Foundation for their support, that they gave us grant to be able to improve the infrastructure of our programming. And I would like to say thank you to Dr. Ankli that made it possible for us to have this grant. So at this time, Mena is going to launch a poll. It's like pre-knowledge question. We appreciate if you respond to the poll, and I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair Janan for additional information.
Thank you, Shiva. Again, good evening, everyone. Welcome. We recognize that we have some folks still trickling in, so we appreciate the patience in us getting started. Again, my name is Janan. I serve as the co-chair of this committee. I believe the poll is still going on, so if you're able to listen and be active in the poll, please do so. I just want to give some background information. Again, we're thrilled that you could be here with us. This is our second year of programming for the Social Justice Speaker Series of CPA. And broadly, we are really committed to combating racism, promoting community healing and social justice. And we are really advocates for change in our community. Tonight is our 6th speaker series for this year. And we are excited to be in the presence of Dr. Mona Amir, as they will come and share your brilliance with us. So again, thank you for the invitation. The CPA Social Justice Speaker Series offers free monthly meetings to CPA members, and we are also able to offer CE credits for psychologists, including tonight. So again, thank you for the effort that goes on behind the scenes to be able to do so, and we hope that you learn so much from tonight's conversation and that we can have an open dialogue. Again, thank you for being in community with us as we do this work. At this time, I'm going to pass it to Mena, who will be introducing our speaker this evening.
Hello, everybody. At this time, I'm going to introduce our speaker for the evening, Dr. Mona Amir. Dr. Amir is a professor of clinical and community psychology and founding chair of the Department of Psychology at the American University in Cairo. She co-founded and served as the first elected president of the American Arab, Middle Eastern, and North African Psychological Association, Amina Sai. Dr. Amir focuses on US racial ethnic disparities in behavioral health with specializations in the Arab and Muslim minorities. She's interested in how immigration experiences, acculturation stressors, discrimination, and minority status contribute to disparities and ways to eliminate inequities through culturally competent services, community-based programming, and social policy. Dr. Amir's publications include 2 articles in American Psychologist and 2 landmark co-edited books, The Handbook of Arab American Psychology and Counseling Muslims, Handbook of Mental Health Issues and Interventions. In 2020, she also received the Amina Sai Award for Distinguished Contribution to Psychological Scholarship. We're really honored to have you here. I give you the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's really, it's actually very exciting to be here. I just even in the chat I was having before the session, it brought back a lot of memories from all the years that I spent in Connecticut in my pre-doc and postdoc years, and also doing some work ever since then. So I wish I was there in person, but you know, at least I have the opportunity to share some insights and some discussions with you today. So thanks so much to the Connecticut Psychological Association for inviting me and for hosting this series talking about social justice issues and working with different communities. If I can ask everybody, please put yourself on mute. I got a comment on the chat where I am looks wonderful. Actually, the background is from Miami and I'm currently in Columbus, Ohio. So this is not what it looks like over here. So, but thanks for that comment. So because there's a lot to talk about, we're not going to have, you know, open discussion except for at the end. Hopefully we'll have a few minutes to have questions and answers, but there will be things that I'll be asking you to, you know, write in the chat or to do. So make sure that you set up your Zoom setup on your, you know, on your whatever device you're using so that you can see the chat and type into the chat, please. So today we're talking about Islamophobia and Muslim American mental health. And wanted to just touch a bit on sort of some of suggestions for outreach and advocacy. The topics that I want to cover are, first, we want to think about how are Muslims perceived in the first place, and then kind of orient ourselves to who are the Muslims in America, so we know what is the population we're talking about in the first place. And then talk about a little bit about how is Islamophobia experienced, like what does it look like in terms of like what kinds of things do Muslims face living in the US because of the growing rise of Islamophobia, and then what are the consequences on psychological well-being, so not just mental health per se, but psychological well-being in general. And then talk a little bit about considerations for clinical practice. And I'm not going to be talking about like psychotherapy and counseling advice or you know, how to be culturally competent. I think that's another topic, and I don't think we can cover that in, you know, half an hour, 45 minutes. But I want to talk a little bit about assessment, like what are the issues we need to talk about and think about when we meet with our clients who are Muslims that we may, you know, overlook. And then some ideas for community outreach, how to get out of, you know, get out of the office and do things in the community where, you know, things need to be done, and a little bit about advocacy as well. So as I'm going through, if you can think about also if there are any particular resources you want to know more about, like certain types of websites, certain types of publications, organizations, think about that, because at the end I want to ask you that, because I'm going to put together a handout with resources for you. And also the presentation from today will also be sent to everybody after the session as well. Okay, so let's get going. So first we want to talk a little bit about how are Muslims perceived. And what I want you to do is think about what are the first descriptors or characteristics or words that come to people's minds when they think of Muslims. So you have here a QR code if you want to just, you know, wave your phone or device on it so that you can log into the site. And I want you to add like 5 descriptors, the most. If you want to add more, you're welcome to submit the survey again. If you don't have a way to check, you know, go through there using the QR code, you're welcome to use the link that is here, www.menti.com/E6BVN8YUP1. Thank you, Janan, for sharing the link on the chat. So if you want to just copy that link, that's another option. All righty, is everybody done? You can use your reactions to put a thumbs up if you're done. Alrighty. Okay, sounds good. All right. So let's take a look and see what are some of the things that people came up with. All right. So collectively, from the words that, and it looks like people are still submitting answers, which is fine. So we have things like terrorist, violence, territorial, things related to dangerous. So these are words related to sort of threat, enemy. Looks like there are words related to being religious, conservative, restrictive. So these kind of relate to being kind of rigid and closed off and being traditional. I can see here words about being different, mysterious, unusual, things like that. So, you know, is this a population sort of like an enigma? And then we also see words related to being oppressed, and then ignorant, scary, and you can see how you can just look at those words right now, so you can see sort of what's come up, and then a few things related to mosque and characteristics. We have one kind here, which is nice to see. So I just want you to think for a couple of moments what it must be like to walk in this world, to walk in the US, and have this be the image that people have about you day after day. That there's something insecure or threatening about you, that you come from a traditional culture that is very conservative and closed off, that there's something suspicious or unusual, mysterious about you. Imagine what that must be like. I mean, all of us, I'm sure, have had experiences where maybe we were misjudged about something, or, you know, for a while, people had all these negative impressions of us at work or with our family, or something that we did that was misinterpreted. But it was, you know, transient. It was, you know, it was over. But this is something that Muslims have to face day after day, you know, living in the US. And these perceptions are not necessarily perceptions of the other, you know, people who are, you know, average everyday people out in the, you know, in the communities. These are also perceptions that are held by mental health practitioners, held by psychologists, held by healthcare workers, held by people who are offering services or trying to offer services to this population. And we really need to be careful about that. So we're going to come back to the issue of perceptions of Muslims, but before that, let's try to clarify who are the Muslims in the US. And I want you to first write in the chat, reflect for a couple of moments and think about it, and write in the chat just a number, one number, of how many Muslim clients have you served in your professional career as a psychologist since graduate school. So obviously, if you've been in the career longer, you may have had more experience, but just want to see how many. So if everybody can just take a moment to write a number of how many people that they have served that were Muslim. Oh, wow, we have one person here is 25 to 40. My goodness. So it looks like so far 10 is a popular number, and then a lot of people are also sort of between around 5 as being an average, right? Okay. And a few people here haven't had much experience working with Muslims at all. Okay. Now, I want to tell you that when I was doing my doctoral training, I remember I had a client who was a teenager, African American, And I worked with her for many months, and then we ended our, our relationship together. And another member of the team at the community mental health center where I was working told me, "Oh, you had so and so as one of your clients. She was with me too." It must have been really good for her to have a Muslim therapist, given that you're Muslim and she is too. And I had never known that she was Muslim. It never occurred to me to ask. It never occurred to me that she would be. How would I know that? And over the years, that kind of experience has happened again and again, where, I've had colleagues who have clients and they're talking about their clients, and I'm like, but that's a Muslim name. They must be Muslim. And the colleague is telling me, no, they're not Muslim. If they were, I would know. Or people that I've served and I didn't know they were Muslim until much later. And oftentimes it's, these conceptions like, oh, well, she's not wearing anything on her head, so I didn't think she was Muslim, right? Or she's African-American, or he's African-American. I didn't think that person was a Muslim. So my point is that all the numbers you've written may be wrong in terms of your estimate of how many people you've served. At the end of the day, we are going to come into contact with people who are Muslim, most probably. And so it's important to be prepared. Now you'll have a quiz for you before I get into some just basic demographics about the Muslim population worldwide and in the US and in Connecticut. So, think to yourself, maybe write on a piece of paper, whether these statements are true or false. Islam is the second largest religion in the world. All right, so just keep this to yourself, and we're gonna, come back to these questions later. Muslims follow religion from the book of Sharia. Number 3, the first Muslims in America to come to America were African slaves during the slave trade. The majority of Muslims in the US are Arab. And the Muslims in Connecticut are clustered in 2 cities. Are these questions true or false? So keep them in mind, think about what you thought, and let's see how many of these you, thought were accurate in as we move through the presentation. And hold on, I just need to move this up because this is getting in my way. All right. All right, so let's talk first about Islam. The word Islam, all Arabic words come from roots. They're roots of 3 or 4 letters usually, and those letters have meanings behind them that form the bulk of numerous words that come from the same root. And the word Islam comes from the root salama. And that root is in combination used to make words related to primarily things like being peaceful, non-violent, when something is safe and sound, it's protected, it's healthy, it doesn't have any deformations, it comes with that word. And also the word, the salama root is also involved in words and concepts related to submission, surrendering, giving yourself up. And that is sort of the idea of what Islam is about. It's a way of life that focuses on harmony and peacefulness and surrendering yourself to the Lord and trying to follow the guidelines that he has given us through multiple prophets, including Abraham, Jesus, Moses, and Prophet Muhammad, and trying to follow these guidelines to be better people on this earth. And so there's that sense of surrendering or submission. And so that's what Islam is about. And even when you say salamu alaikum to somebody, which is like, it means peace be upon you. It's the same word, salam. It's coming from the same word as Islam, right? And that's the core of Islam. So it's really, the main themes of peace and surrendering to the Lord or to God, and other, there's other like words related as well, like greetings and ladder and things like that. Now, Islam is not a religion. And I know this is hard to, kind of really, push this point home, because we have to call it a religion because that's how we think about it when we classify, religion, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, etc. But actually, Islam is a comprehensive way of life. I mean, there's pretty much, I can't think of a single thing that you can do in a day, going to the bathroom, eating food, meeting with friends, seeing somebody who's sick, paying money for taxes, voting in elections, that doesn't have some kind of guidelines or, behind how to do that in a better way, or how to do it in a way that increases, that really emphasizes harmony, moderation, peacefulness, interrelation, interdependence, things like that. Even like taking care of animals, environment, all of that is captured in this way of life. And how do people know about it? Muslims who want to follow, it's really endless. There's no way to know everything that can be done or should be done or are recommended to do in this way of life. But the main sources of information are the Quran, which the Muslims believe are the word is the book that has the word of God, and it has not been changed or there's only one version essentially. And the Sunnah, which is the sayings or the recordings of what was said and done by Prophet Muhammad and his companions at the time. Sharia, there's no book of Sharia, it doesn't exist. I've lived in Muslim countries. I have lots of Muslim friends, and the issue of Sharia never came to light until recent years in the US with this like media hype about it. Sharia is just sort of a body of knowledge. It's sort of like, science. Is there a book of science? No, there's no book of science. It's just a body of knowledge related to things and guidelines. But there's no book. The books are, or they are books, are the Quran and then the Sunnah, which has many, many books that have been scientifically developed over time to record what was said and what was not said at the time of the Prophet. The main beliefs that Muslims have to do with that there's one God, so it's a monotheistic religion or way of life. Angels, the Holy Scriptures, the Psalms, the Bible, the Old Testament, all of these are believed in. The prophets that came before is a long sequence from the time and messengers to the Prophet Muhammad, who is the final prophet, at the day of judgment, and then God's ordainment or predestination. And the things that Muslims do to sort of the pillars of the core of the faith have to do with, on a regular basis, moment by moment, constantly professing your faith and belief in this one God, on a daily level, doing prayers 5 times a day, on a yearly level, giving alms. So that's the, it's, your zakah or alms, and also fasting for Ramadan is yearly. And then on a lifetime level, going to pilgrimage to Mecca. Now, so those are the things that, now, of course, there's lots of variations. And because Islam is so vast, not everybody practices in the same way. And there's lots of cultural variations and things like that. And one of the reasons why there's a lot of diversity is because Muslims are diverse. About 1/4 of the world's population, 1.8 billion people, are Muslim. That's 1/4 of the world are Muslim. And the majority are in Asia. So the biggest Muslim countries, the most populous, the most dominant, are in Asia. The Middle East, North Africa, in other words, the Arab world, accounts for only about 20%. And then we have growing populations in sub-Saharan Africa. And then Europe, North America, the global North essentially has, accounts for very few percentages of Muslims. It is the second largest religion after Christianity, and also the fastest growing religion, and expected to outpace Christianity in about 25-30 years. The countries with the largest Muslim populations, Indonesia, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, have held the top 4 slots for years and years, decades and decades. Nigeria, and the fifth country has shifted over time. Right now it is Nigeria, which is in Africa. Now, what about in the United States? Because that's the demographics in the worldwide. Well, there's some evidence, and there's lots of debates over when did Muslims first come to the shores of sort of the Americas, Central America, North America. But there's some evidence that Muslims came in the 12th century, and that they were explorers. And a lot of the, because Muslims believed always that the world was round, because the Quran says that the world is round. So they went exploring. And even Christopher Columbus, when he came in, 14 and supposedly discovered America, which of course had been discovered many times again and again before that, where did he find, where did he get support for his maps and, all the other explorers who came? There's some suggestion that, they were Muslims primarily from like Northern Africa, Morocco, who had a direct line with Spain, right? So there was that connection. But the biggest, the first biggest volume of Muslims coming to the US were during the slave trade. So about 15 to 30% of slaves were from Africa, and they were Muslims. Now, looking at, and it says 50% on the slide because there's so many, again, it's hard to estimate, but most of the, the data says 15 to 30%, 10 to 30%. Now, what about Muslims today in the US? About almost 60% are foreign-born immigrants, and a whole other big group are their children. And then there's a minority who are, third or fourth or fifth generation. Despite being majority immigrants, the majority are US citizens or, permanent residents. There are very few Muslims that are undocumented or are sojourners, like temporarily coming. As for the total population, we really don't know how many there are. In the, around 2000, there were lots of groups doing estimates that estimated back then about, 7-8 million. And now there's only really one or two organizations, and they're estimating about 3.5 million. So it's really unclear. But it is the fastest growing religion in the US as well, partly because of immigration and partly because of having more children than the average families that are not Muslim. Now, what about their ethnic background? Are they Arab? I mean, because that's really the belief or the conception that a lot of people have. It's really hard to tell because Muslims are not recorded on any like government databases, census, etc., because, it's a religious, characteristic. So it's, not acceptable to be included. So we don't know. Based on polling data and field work, there is some suggestion that about 42% of Muslims in the US are born in the US, and that the rest are, primarily coming from South Asia, Middle East. And then there's other research looking at who attends, who's active at a mosque, who attends mosques. So the mosques are reporting what's the ethnic background of their congregants, and the largest are 39% South Asian, 28% Arab, and 16% African American. When we look at racial self-identification, the largest group is white, but that would include Middle Easterners, so it's kind of hard to figure that out, and then Asian, and then Black. And Asian, of course, we mean mostly South Asian, right? Because we're talking about, as we said, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia. And then another poll on ethnic self-identification shows the largest groups to be African American or Black, white non-Arab, so that would be people from the former Soviet Union, the Bosnian states, etc., Europeans, white, Caucasian, like European Americans who converted, and 18% Asian and 18% Arab. So it's not clear, but over the years, over the decades, we really seen that the two groups that are really vying for the top spot in terms of numbers are African American and South Asian. And Arabs are sort of, third in third place, usually around 18 to 20%. What about in Connecticut? We don't know about the ethnic background of people in Muslims in Connecticut. A number of different field work and organizations have estimated the population to be about 150,000 Muslims, numbering about less than 1% of the state. But there's a very active community. There are 49 documented mosques or Islamic centers, and you can see from the map that they are kind of follow along the sort of the major highways in the major cities, but they are everywhere. So, Muslims in Connecticut are not in one or two particular locations. All right, so back to our quiz. Hopefully you can kind of compare to what your answers were at the beginning. Islam, in conclusion, Islam is the second largest religion in the world and also fastest growing. Muslims gained their knowledge about their faith from the Quran and the Sunnah. The first Muslims in America came way before, before many of the European, sort of powers came. And but the African community was the first biggest group. The majority of Muslims in the US are not Arab, and Muslims are in different parts of the state of Connecticut. So now that we sort of have a general idea of the Muslim community, and I hope that this has clarified some things, I do want to also point out that in the US, even though in the Arab world, the majority of Arabs are Muslim, the majority of Arabs in the United States historically have been Christian. And it's only shifted in recent years because of refugees and immigrants after the recent wars post 9/11. But prior to that, most of the polls and data and fieldwork says that Arabs are Christian. So I mean, really, it's like a Venn diagram, right? Where there's Muslim and Arabs overlap, but they are not the same. All right, and being perceived to be Arab or kind of lumping in all Muslims as one particular group is an example of some of the stereotypes that people have about this community. And it's really important to recognize that these stereotypes, especially negative stereotypes, have really, really exacerbated in recent years. We're talking, and these stereotypes really fuel prejudice, which are negative emotions and feelings towards Muslims, and then may or may not, but in many cases do translate into actual behavior in terms of discrimination and policies. One thing that I think is really important to note is that this Islamophobia, these negative stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination against Muslims, is not accidental. It didn't just happen. It's not just a consequence, doesn't appear from the media. It is an orchestrated, orchestrated effort by a network of funders and organizations, and you can check out this website if you want to know more about it. There's a lot of effort to spread that. Now, over the past few years, the Institute of Social Policy and Understanding has done an index of Islamophobia to kind of get a sense of what are some of the main things that people think about Muslims, and in general, the concepts that they're more violent, they are oppressive against women, they don't like the US, they're less civilized, and they should be responsible for the acts of other Muslims. And we can see that those kinds of Islamophobic sentiments are experienced or reported in higher rates by white and evangelical Christians in general, and on the lower end are shared by Jews and Muslims themselves. So they're sort of on the lower end of that. A lot of documented discrimination has been seen. Some people think that discrimination against Muslims increased after 9/11 as like one peak and then it went down, but that is not true. It has gone up and up and up and up and up. And as it's gone up, there have been peaks. Like when President Obama was elected, there was peaks in discrimination against all people of color, and Muslims were incorporated. When there was certain wars, when Donald Trump was president and had a series of policies, all of those led to peaks in these perceptions. And Muslims may face discrimination on 3 different levels: on an interpersonal level, being bullied, called names, having their homes or mosques vandalized, being excluded. At the organizational level, in terms of housing, not getting hired for jobs, or not being able to practice religion at jobs, or being terminated from jobs. In healthcare settings, 1/4 of Muslims in the US say that they've been discriminated against in terms of services, schooling, and then at the institutional level, in terms of policies and at the national level that have really trickled down and impacted the experience of going through airports, interacting with law enforcement, widespread monitoring and surveillance of communities, and then of course policies like the Muslim ban. And the most recent 2020 report of ISPU, 60% of Muslims said over the past year they faced discrimination because of their religion. And there's different reports that show different things, but it is something that happens. People do face it, and we need to acknowledge it. And we need to acknowledge it. Why? Because of the consequences on well-being. It affects people's identity. I mean, in terms of internalizing these ideas or trying to decide, like, who am I in the face of all of these perceptions? And how can I adapt to be life in the US? It affects mental health in terms of symptoms of trauma, anxiety, depression, physical health, social health, even things like leisure, going out to places for fun. People restrict their behaviors. Muslims restrict their behaviors at times when they feel like they're not welcome. At the community level, feeling that there's a lack of belonging, or that people feel unsafe or being monitored all the time, and being afraid of, having to watch your back. And then education and educational attainment, and employment opportunities. But there are some protective factors that we should consider as mental health practitioners. And that includes ethnic identity. So some people think, well, oh, you have to assimilate, become totally American, drop your ethnic roots and then you'll be fine. And that's not true. So ethnic identity has been shown to be really powerful. Family support and family functioning, social support from friends, neighbors, community members, community networks, like having healthy community and communal ties. Religion has been shown, and this is for, most of the research on religion has been with Judeo-Christian samples, but the work that's been done with Muslims show the same, that religion is a buffer for mental health. So religiosity and religious coping can help. Although Muslims, of course, are more targeted for discrimination if they look visibly Muslim. So there could be like sort of pluses and minuses, but in general, religion is a protective factor. And then, of course, socioeconomic status. So, okay, knowing these kind of stressors, the impact of mental health, and some of the protective factors, we'll talk a little bit about clinical work. And I want you to just think for a couple of moments here, what steps have you already taken to prepare yourself to be an effective therapist working with Muslims? Maybe there are trainings you've taken on cultural competence in general. Maybe you've learned skills on how to talk to people who are Latino and you think that that could translate. Books you've read, things you've done. Because I think it's important not to go into these sessions blindly, and to think about what kind of resources and strengths you have as a therapist in order to be able to be effective working with this population. And in order to be effective working with any population, of course, we know to be culturally competent, part of it is your attitude. So kind of checking your biases and considering if you have any prejudices, gaining more knowledge about the community, and then also knowledge about the skills that could work, like what kind of interventions can be more effective when working with Muslims or any population. We're not going to talk about that. There's lots of literature out there and resources out there for that. But what I do want to point out is the question of trauma and, collective identity trauma. And I want you to think about that too, because most of us have been trained in how to work with individual, personal, or interpersonal trauma, rape, sexual abuse, traumatic event that happened. That's where we got our ideas of, trauma. But what about trauma from discrimination, trauma from long-standing social exclusion, trauma from that? So, this is, something that we need to think about. And so we need to think about ways to assess for that trauma, to assess for collective identity and cumulative trauma, to assess for culturation and culture, religion and spirituality and identities. And, think about the fact that a lot of our assessment tools don't capture these things. What parenting stress measure includes how do I work, talk to my kids about, the discrimination they face? What kind of trauma measures include discrimination as a point on it? So we need to think about ways to ask these questions, and we need to think about ways to talk to our clients as we are working with them. And so in the next few minutes, I want to, before we get into going into outreach, I want you to think about ways that we can ask these questions to our clients. So if we don't know a lot about Muslims or Islam, and you want to, open the dialogue to talk about these issues that are affecting them on a daily level, discrimination, the Islamophobia, what are the things that you can ask? And I have a few examples here. You can say things like, I heard, this mosque was vandalized the other day, or I heard about this event happening. How do you feel about that? How has it affected you? You could say, I know that a lot of Muslims face pressures and discrimination nowadays. What about you? I mean, what have you faced? Is that something that you want to talk about? You can ask about, like, well, what's it like being a Muslim living in Bridgeport or, Hartford, and what should I know about that? So when we're asking about those kinds of issues of discrimination and Islamophobia, can you think of other questions that can be asked? And I'm just going to ask you to just in the chat write a question, one question you can ask to a client that can help you bridge that sort of dialogue or that discussion with them about those issues. So think about it and write just a questions, and I'll collect these questions and add them to the slides. Okay, so there's some silence here. What I want you to think about is like how to word these questions, how to talk about it. Think about things you ask other people of other minority groups. Okay, you can ask about Muslim identity. What would it be like? Thank you to those who are adding some questions here. Okay, very nice. Okay, so please keep adding these questions. We have about 5 minutes left, so I, want to get into some of the other topics. But the silence, or like the pause before people could quickly come up with questions, takes us to the issue of the process. How do we ask questions when we don't know what to ask or how to ask it, or we're embarrassed, or we feel like, oh, I should know this, but I don't know it. So I think it's really important to bridge that, discussion as well. So to talk about, like, tell me if something I say doesn't match your cultural values, or, it's you find it offensive, or, I know this is a silly question, but I want to ask this, or I think it's better to ask things instead of making assumptions. So, what about this or that? I'd like to learn about this. Do you have any preferences for where I can get information about it? But I think these are the kinds of things that you can say to help kind of bridge the gap, because I think a lot of times as therapists, when we're working with people, we want to ask, but we don't want to sound ignorant, or we don't want to sound judgmental, or we're just clueless about certain things, or we heard something, but we don't know if it's true. And there's nothing wrong with just saying that to the client and saying, look, I heard this thing. I don't know if it's true. Is it true for you? I don't know how to ask this question. I'm going to do my best. If I fumble along the way, I hope you, just accept that, but I want to ask you this and that. But more than anything, I think it's important to know a lot of answers so you don't ask a lot of questions, because a lot of Muslims come, I hear over and over again, they tell me, I am so sick and tired of talking to my therapist. Half of the session, I have to explain things to them. I need a new therapist who already knows. So I do think that, just like if you have a client who has, multiple sclerosis, and you're going to do a lot of research and figure out what it's like so that you can treat them better, I think it's really important to do the same when you're working with Muslims. So that has to do with assessment and talking with people in counseling. But we also want to consider getting out of the rooms where we're working. I think one of the things that we've seen is that we need to, as psychologists, not just bridge the gap with our clients, but also bridge the gap with communities. We need to be out there. People, we're often trained that if individuals are healthy, then that will produce healthy communities. But what we've seen again and again in the past, few years is that when communities are not healthy, that produces individuals that are that are not healthy. We need to work at the community level, and we need to especially do that with Muslims because the stigma of mental illness and stigma of getting treatment prevents them from coming in for counseling. And so we need to go out and do things in the community. And what can we do? And I think the first thing to think about, you individually, what you can do is think about who are the Muslims that you have strongest connections with. It could be your doctor, it could be somebody you see at the grocery store, it could be the person who cuts your hair at the barber. But think about that and make a list. And then maybe start with those connections if you want to do work and you want to do something in the community, because we do need to take a step out and do things in the community. We can't just, accept things as they are. I think as psychologists, we have this sort of responsibility to do that. So start with these connections, ask how you can, can we collaborate? Is anything going on? Can I support? You need to build relationships over time so that there's trust. You can connect with other, psychologists or mental health professionals who are experts in working with Muslims. It's really important in general also to not just come in and say, oh, Muslims, need help with, dealing with anxiety. I'm going to do anxiety programming. Why not ask the community? I mean, I did a needs assessment in Ohio, and the top issue that was reported by the Muslim community was the stressors of finding a partner for marriage. It wasn't depression or anxiety or any of the other things we're talking about in this presentation. But, this is important to do needs assessments and also to frame messaging from a strength-based approach. You can talk about if you're going to do a session on emotional well-being, call it happiness instead of calling it depression. How can you be more happy versus how can you be less depressed? Some ideas for outreach, things that you might think about doing, and I really hope that you just brainstorm and think about this. At Islamic centers, you can work to do mental health screenings as part of their health screening days, offer informational lectures, develop interventions, whether prevention or promotion or counseling groups. You could offer to do counseling and training for the religious leaders or the community leaders or the administrators. And also whenever there's events, right, like a hate crime, suicide, there's been a spate of suicides that have been, that has just, really shaken up a lot of the Muslim communities across the US in just recent months. When there's an accident, talk to them about that. When you're working with these communities, you might want to talk to them about mental health and therapy. So kind of give them some more information, because a lot of Muslims, actually, the data is kind of controversial about to what extent Muslims think favorably or unfavorably. But what is clear is that even if they think favorably, they don't want to come in for counseling in many cases because of the stigma associated. So trying to bring out the mental health services to the Islamic centers can reduce or alleviate some of that stigma. And then for immigrants who've never heard about talk therapy, that could be a good opportunity to explain it. If you're working in schools and universities, all of the initiatives done for minority groups can really sort of be paralleled when working with Muslims in terms of anti-bullying, support groups, empowerment, identity development groups, and awareness sessions. You can collaborate with Muslim organizations, student organizations. There's lots and lots of nonprofit organizations. This is new. The landscape has really shifted, that are focused on working with Muslims or ethnic groups that have a dominant, in that particular city or whatever, have a lot of Muslim members. And those range from anything from social services, legal, civic, civic engagement, older adults, care centers, youth, refugees, etc. So why not, step out of the work that you're doing and try to collaborate with these organizations? Many of them, they need mental health services, they need mental health supports, they need help understanding how they can address mental health issues within the context of the other issues they're working on, and they don't have the resources. So why not offer some of those resources and also work with the staff in terms of burnout and consultation and things like that. If you're really, really creative and flexible and have a lot of, adventure, you can step into do things at like other places that are not related to health or well-being or community, like grocery stores, restaurants, write a letter for the local ethnic newspaper, speak on the radio. Connecticut has I don't know if it's still going, a longstanding Muslim radio channel that was very popular that used to always interview people for it. So those are just some ideas, but I think the point is really to step out of your, the zone of where you are working and do something and engage the community to work with them, because, given the discrimination and the social injustices that are affecting this community, it's really important that we try to support the community as much as we can. And we can also do so with advocacy in your own personal life in terms of sharing. You don't have to put in a lot of effort to write an op-ed or develop a petition or file some kind of resolution, but you can certainly support those when they come around in your local neighborhoods, communities, sharing news. At the workplace, trying to work on changing policies that are disadvantaging or causing barriers for Muslims. Like if you're working in a psychiatric hospital and there's certain dress codes or diets that is not culturally sensitive, including making the environment more inclusive in terms everything from the demographic forms to the decor on the walls, and working on trying to do more trainings like the one we're doing right now to support staff. And then, of course, in your professional service circles, like associations, in terms of signing on to advocacy statements, endorsing, disseminating it, things like that, and media releases and things like that. So these are just some ideas for all of that. I know we're like 4 minutes over time from what I wanted to end so that we can have some discussion for questions and answers. But I hope that some of these things just at least gave you some ideas for where to go and where to get started. And we have a few minutes now for questions or comments.
So for those who have questions, feel free to unmute yourselves and ask, or drop a question in the chat and we can read it aloud. As we mentioned, we have some post-presentation questions to ask that just launched on your screen. Please take a minute to fill that out on the poll. And I'll be the first to say thank you, Dr. Amir, as questions roll in.
And while you're asking questions, you're also welcome in the chat to write your dream list of resources that you want that related to working with Muslims, that what kinds of resources would be helpful for you. And I can put that in together. All right, so Cynthia asked a question about how do I feel about the term MENA, Middle East, North Africa, which has also been the term that we're using in the association we started, the association that I co-founded, which is the 5th Ethnic Minority Association in the US, the Psychological Association. And honestly, I think that needs another, separate conversation. It's very controversial. MENA is a definition that was posed by, Western imperialistic powers that overlapped with colonialism, and it's a very sort of arbitrary geographical area that is based on political things. But then what else do you call this group of Arabs? And they're not all Arab. So Middle East, North Africa is kind of regional, and it does capture this group that now is considered white. Like I'm white apparently in the US, and and so I don't know, but that's the census, the people working on the census are pushing for the MENA category as well. So advocacy, these are things you can do for advocacy, try to get some of these categorizations in your workplaces, or support them when people are fighting for them. Other questions or comments? Thank you, Cynthia. As you're putting ideas for topics you want to have resources for, if you can also tell me the types of resources you're interested in. Like, do you want to know organizations that do advocacy? Do you want to have, research articles on how, like that research to support some of the things I've talked about? Do you want to know what are the databases of Muslim mental health practitioners that are out there that you can collaborate with? So also put the types of resources. That'll help me also kind of put together a good collection for you. Thank you. Any other comments or questions, or, anything that struck you from the talk today? I know it's very short. How do you work with Muslims? It's sort of like, how do you work with Christians? How do you work with Americans? It's really not really something that you can cover in 45 minutes. But if anybody wants to share anything that struck them or they learned or they want to take home.
Dr. Amir, I just would like to say thank you. It was a great presentation, and the dialogues that you shared with us is very helpful, because when I experienced seeing Muslim patients, when those dialogues were created, they felt much safer. So I think we really need that kind of dialogue. And if you have any sources, and specifically with the language, that you can help us to use specific language and also those kind of specific conversations.
Sure. I can write up a cheat sheet of things you can say, right? So yes.
Thank you.
I do have one question, and this is something that I've been kind of grappling with back and forth for a while, and there have been several circumstances where I've been kind of pushed to work with certain students, or I used to do a lot of refugee work, or kind of basically matched with refugees coming from Somalia who are Muslim, just because I come from the Middle East and they assume that coming from Iran that I'm a practicing Muslim, or that my parents are practicing Muslims, which they are not. And I've always approached it where, regardless of my background, anyone I meet, even if they have like any connection with Islam, their experience can be so much different than somebody else's. And so what are your opinions about matching people based upon backgrounds? Do you think it is more preferable to have someone that does have more of a historical background with that particular religion, or do you think that may potentially also cause some tension if they have different perspectives on the culture as well, or their own biases associated with that?
Well, I think you're asking a number of questions here together. And part of it is, should we match? Do the clients want to match? And what kind of matching and in what way? Of course, we know from the literature and from research that when people are matched with people from similar backgrounds, at least the ethnic minority literature, that it does accelerate developing rapport at the beginning, and that sort of can support, in terms of retention of clients. Although outcomes over longer time, it's not, like the literature is more mixed. So we know that's the case. I think I know from working with and interacting with lots of Muslims, again, that it's not a matter necessarily of being matched with, what do people want? A lot of Muslims don't want to be with a Muslim. I don't want to see a Muslim therapist because I know I'm a psychologist. I don't want anybody to know my stuff. And the community is so closed. But a lot of Muslims don't want to see Muslim therapists because the community is so close-knit and they don't trust the confidentiality. And when you're living a life of surveillance and monitoring, which I think this is the unique aspect of being a Muslim in America, which is different from other minority groups. You know that your behaviors are tracked. You know that the sermons in your mosques are being watched. You know that the things that are being said at your community events are being recorded. And that's different. I mean, there are video cameras on streets in Muslim, communities. It's different that's not what it's like for other communities. And so I don't want to see a Muslim therapist because, everything I say is not going to be held confidential. But I think the important thing is, number one, don't assume that if the therapist is from the same background that they're going to know how to work with people of that same background, right? That's number one. Just because you're Muslim doesn't mean you're magically capable, like that you have the skills and knowledge to work with Muslims. And I think that it's really a shame that this is what we do in our communities. Like, oh, I have a book I'm writing. I need a chapter on Muslims. Oh, you're Muslim. Can you write it? I mean, come on. Would we do that with any other type of topic that needs, like expertise? You live in a house. Can you write about, environmental psychology and, what it's like, I mean, or, So that's the first thing, is don't assume that. The second thing is ask the clients, what do they prefer, and find out what do they want. And the third thing is that if you, no matter what, you are Muslim, you're not Muslim, you're the same ethnic background, you're not, is to always double check the biases, double check your assumptions, question them, ask them. You said in your question, well, we might have different views or cultural ways of looking at things as Muslims or in my, ethnic group, but that's the same for any client, right? For any background, you're not going to assume that you have the same ideas about anything from religion to sports to education to social issues. So always question them. So it's a long answer. I know that we to your question, but thank you for asking that question.
No, it was a great answer. Any other questions before we?
Yeah, it's 8:04.
So I will gladly get us started to end this. So we just want to first thank you all for joining us this evening. I would like to invite you to complete our post survey link that is being added to the chat now. Your responses to our survey will help us in planning future sessions. Our next speaker series will be on August 25th at 7 p.m. for our early career spotlight, in which Asia Perkins and Dr. Maria Crouch will both be presenting their work. Of note, our next speaker series will be from 7 p.m. to 8:15 p.m. to allow for adequate time for both presenters and discussions. I would like to end by mentioning that our ability to maintain the social justice speaker series is through fundraising, and we greatly appreciate all the donations moving forward. If you are able to support, the donation link is also in the chat. Thank you for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you next month.